Hello, my name is Jeff Farbman from the Wallace Center at Winrock International. Welcome to another National Good Food Network webinar. In this webinar, GroupGAP, USDA's new cooperative approach to farmer food safety certification, we will present stories of some of the GroupGAP pilots, groups who stepped out in front of the curve and put in a tremendous amount of hard, groundbreaking work to be the first who have led their growers to certification as a group through USDA. I want to make sure I mention the other groups who are not presenting today. We have a packed agenda as it is, but these folks work just as hard and just as cooperatively. The Western Montana Growers Cooperative in collaboration with Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center, the Iowa Food Hub and Iowa State Extension, ALBA, New Appalachia, working under the guidance of Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, and the very first pilot, Good Natured Family Farms. Thank you all for your work. Finally, I wanted to make it clear that we will not be talking about all the technical details of getting GroupGAP certified in this webinar. The USDA has a fantastic webinar on that, and moreover, we'll be releasing a written user's guide with a mountain of specifics. This webinar is intended to give you a sense for the range of groups that decided to pursue GroupGAP certification, why, and their experiences. If you want to have a chance to interact with these GroupGAP pioneers, I suggest that you come to the upcoming National Food Hub Conference in Atlanta at the end of March this year. I will provide more details on that at the end of the webinar. So let me introduce the Wallace Center and its National Good Food Network. The Wallace Center, a business unit of Winrock International, is the host of the NGFN National Good Food Network webinar series. The Wallace Center has been a leading organization in the movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for over 25 years. In particular, we're focused on advancing regional collaborative efforts around the country to move good food, healthy, green, fair, affordable food beyond the direct marketing realm into larger scale wholesale channels. The National Good Food Network, or NGFN, is an initiative of the Wallace Center. We create national communities of practice around market-based issues, enabling peer-to-peer as well as peer-to-expert communication to ensure efficient flow of information and innovation from boots-on-the-ground projects to the national level and back down to the grassroots level across the nation. The Wallace Center coordinates and supports this network. We work with growers to ensure that there's abundant supply of good food to meet the high consumer demand, to collect and disseminate the best models, stories, methods, and outcomes, and to ensure that policymakers are informed about the wonderful successes our network and partners have had so that we continue to increase support for healthy regional food. To learn more about the great work of the National Good Food Network and dig into our great resources to help in your work, go to our website. That's ngfn.org. We have a really packed agenda today. You hear me rushing through this introduction, so settle in for an incredible ride. Here is our conference. I'll show you that slide in a minute, or in a few minutes. I'd like to introduce Steve Warschauer now, the National Good Food Network Food Safety Coordinator, and truly one of the main instigators of the USDA GroupGAP program. With his wife and family, he operates Mesa Top Farm and Ranch, producing eggs, raw milk cheese, beef, and produce. He operates the year-round Beneficial Farms CSA, a multi-farm CSA that has the honor of being the oldest CSA in New Mexico. He serves on several government and industry advisory and technical committees, ensuring that the voice of small and sustainable farming is heard. He is also the value chain coordinator, value chain facilitator for La Montanitas Co-op Distribution Center, a food hub in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Steve, can I ask you to give a brief introduction to what GroupGAP is and the implications you feel it has for the small farmer in the U.S.?
Okay, thank you, Jeff. The basic picture of what GroupGAP is would be a organized system for gathering farmers together and creating internal verification system and internal verification processes so that ultimately the system itself is what is verified and audited by an external source. And what this does is it moves a lot of the responsibility for food safety compliance from outside experts or outside service providers to an internal process. And I think one of the main implications for small farmers in the U.S., and this has been the implication worldwide for small farmers, is it's a way to assure market access while being able to comply with food safety expectations, which are typically more easily met by much larger farms who have their own internal food safety and quality staff. So what happens is small farmers, by working together in groups, gain access to the kinds of technical resources that are typically only available to larger organizations. Thinking about it this way, it's like a food safety co-op where resources that as individual farms we could not gain on our own, by aggregating together, we can now gain access to those resources as if we were a larger entity. So with that general picture, why GroupGAP as opposed to other ways of attaining GAP certification? Well, I think there's a little bit of a backstory, which is why is GAP important now anyway? And also within why is GAP important, where did GroupGAP come from? And in the U.S., the seminal event that pushed food safety into the forefront for produce farms was the spinach outbreak in 2006. Which was an incident in which E. coli, I don't know the exact statistics, but it became heavily media publicized. Farms were ultimately implicated in the source of the E. coli, and deaths and hospitalizations occurred across the far reaches of the country, even though the product originated in California. So before that outbreak, the rest of the specialty crop and vegetable and fruit production world had been experiencing expectations around food safety verification. They were voluntary. They were, in many ways, I think, brought forward by multinational retailers who had previous experience developing the same requirements for their overseas operations. So I'm going to circle back to why did those overseas operations become be necessary to develop food safety requirements. And the seminal event in Europe and overseas was the mad cow disease in the UK. I don't remember again the exact year. But what happened was, as a result of that large-scale outbreak, consumer confidence in their food system went way down. And so retailers got together and said, we've got to have a way to restore confidence, and we've got to have a way to address this essential public health concern, which is that people expect to be able to eat safe food, and that expectation needs to be met by all parts of the food supply chain. So in Europe, a retail consortium was formed, which has led to several global initiatives around food safety. And one of the things that they addressed straight up was the problem of small enterprise and smallholder compliance. The food system in Europe depended greatly on emerging market suppliers, for example, in South America and Africa, and even smallholders within Europe itself. And they were keenly aware that the costs of the programs they were requesting, the compliance that they were requesting, were beyond the scope of individual small producers, especially in areas where cash resources, education, and technical resources were limited. So the group approach was formed as part of this European initiative to develop, to raise the bar on food safety for all producers. So fast forward to our spinach outbreak, we have the European approach entering the United States because many of our U.S. specialty crop sectors also export, just as many of our U.S. retailers have overseas operations. So when the spinach outbreak occurred and the focus went on to farms for food safety compliance, that was a time when the bar for food safety was raised. More universal expectation of food safety compliance became the norm. And also that was during the early days of the development of FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, and the consumer advocates will tell you that until that outbreak, they hadn't even considered bringing farms under the umbrella of FSMA. So thinking forward to the landscape in which food safety is addressed in the United States, the third-party audits are probably the norm. They're what we hear the most about. But the other resource and the other key partner in the United States for both retailers and food supply chain partners and for farmers is the Specialty Crop Inspection Division, which is part of USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. For us in the local food movement, and in fact for specialty crop producers all across the U.S., the AMS has been our trusted partner, has brought many programs forward that have helped build our sector, and also has a set of, or a range of user fee-driven programs that it offers that are responses to industry needs, and Specialty Crop Initiative has Specialty Crop Inspection Division, has had a GAP program since the early 2000s. Well, as our trusted partner in GAP certification, we saw that approaching Specialty Crop Inspection Division, asking for their help with a group certification product, that would be an opportunity for some of the lessons learned in Europe to come to North America in a more North American adapted way. So the mission in establishing the GroupGAP program under Specialty Crop Inspection Division was to come up with a method that was more adaptable to the wide range of groups that we have here in the U.S., and that also through the GroupGAP process met the expectations of larger buyers, and many of whom have had experience with group certification through this European model. And the other key aspect of our relationship with Specialty Crop Inspection Division is that USDA retains a direct agency-to-agency relationship with FDA. So as our trusted partner with GAP certification, we also gain access to certain kinds of credibility, which we may have a chance to talk about later, with FDA as we look at the rollout of FSMA. So now I would like to introduce Donna Burke-Fonda, who is our lead has been our lead in the development of the GroupGAP program with USDA's Specialty Crop Inspection Division. Donna is the Assistant Chief of the Audit Services Branch, and I believe her assignment to that branch coincided with the beginning of the pilot process, which has led to the program that you're hearing more about today. Donna has worked with processed fresh fruits and vegetables industry in her role as a commodity grader and market specialist since 1989, and she has extensive experience in the application and development and auditing of quality systems. She's a professional member of the American Society for Quality, the Institute for Food Technologists, and is a certified quality auditor. Over to you now, Donna.
Thank you, Steve. And good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the USDA GroupGAP program. The final program will reflect feedback that we've received from the groups who participated in the 3-year pilot and from our work with the Wallace Center and with AMS Transportation and Marketing. As we move forward this year, each of these entities will have a role to play in the support of the new USDA GroupGAP program. AMS Specialty Crops Inspection Division's Audit Services Branch will manage and administer GroupGAP and is responsible for establishing the program requirements, receiving applications, and quality management system documentation, and performing group system and producer audits. So we'll be ready to start receiving applications to participate in the program on April 3rd. You can visit the GroupGAP website for a statement of requirements and program updates. We do, as Jeff mentioned, we plan to publish a GroupGAP user guide in March, and it will have information on the steps to achieve group certification. The site will also have links for additional resources as they are identified. So I'm imagining a lot of folks are sitting on this call and thinking, okay, how can I get started? And so I am going to get in a little bit into the technical details here so you know what can you do now before you apply. If you're interested in the GroupGAP certification program, you could start with some of these key elements. The process could take 2 or more years to accomplish, so we don't expect everyone who comes to us initially to be ready to be certified in that first year. Here are a few steps that a group might take before they apply to participate in the program. One of the first steps is to decide if GroupGAP is right for you. Some of the questions that you might consider are, do you have a group of producers who are willing to share responsibility for the implementation of food safety practices? Does your group have a knowledgeable staff person who can write and implement a quality management system? Does the group have staff members who can meet the USDA auditor criteria? And last of all, will your buyers accept GroupGAP? Next, you would form a group. Factors to consider here are, do you have a pre-existing network of producers? And is your group ready and on board with GroupGAP? A third step is to select the USDA audit service that your group will use. So this can be any of the GAP and GIP audit services offered by USDA. You would then develop and implement a food safety plan for use at your producer locations, train your growers on food safety requirements, and establish group expectations for producer food safety procedures and records. An additional step, your group would need to create the quality management system. This includes creating shared policy and procedures for the management of your group. It includes training group members and employees on the quality management system and what their responsibilities are. And then it also includes implementing procedures for performing internal audits of the quality management system and the internal audits of your group member production locations. So these last internal audits are actually your group establishing a plan for performing internal producer audits instead of USDA doing those audits. This would include any applicable unannounced verification reviews that are required as part of the USDA audit program. This would also involve identifying group staff who are qualified to become an internal producer audit and to obtain the training so that they meet the USDA GroupGAP internal auditor requirements. So all of this will be stated more fully in the new user guide that you'll see on our site in March. So these are just some of the considerations that an interested group should address if they would like to move forward with GroupGAP. Here's contact information if you have any questions for USDA, and I encourage everyone to pay visit to the GroupGAP website listed here on the bottom of the page. That's where we'll be posting updates to the program, and we have a list of frequently asked questions, and we'll post contact information there and resources. So thank you again for this opportunity to speak, and I look forward to questions at the end of the session.
Thanks, Donna. I am now going to introduce Phil Britton for our first of three pilot explanations. So Phil Britton worked for 6 years in quality systems in the medical device industry. With this professional experience, his interest in food, and his involvement with the Marquette Food Co-op, Phil was a natural match for GroupGAP work. He currently works for Cherry Capital Foods, implementing GroupGAP for them. Phil was involved in the 2014 implementation pilot of GroupGAP by the Upper Peninsula Food Exchange and provides similar assistance to other groups across the country. Phil, a Au Beurre, lives with his family in Marquette, Michigan. As Phil tells a story, I encourage you to think of people in your area who might have quality management systems experience as Phil did, and they might not be in the food field, but these are folks who might be able to assist you as you set up your group. Moreover, pay attention to the contrast between the Upper Peninsula Food Exchange and the Cherry Capital Foods groups. I believe the contrast is really instructive. So, Phil.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. Thanks for spending some time and coming to hang out with us today. So I'm Phil. I'm from Marquette in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Yes, I am a Au Beurre. So yeah, I figured that the best approach for me is to tell my story from my entrance into food systems work through the 2 implementation projects I was involved in. So like Jeff mentioned, prior to this work, I worked for the Quality Systems Department of a small medical device manufacturer here in Marquette called RTI Surgical, which made things that, like you see in the x-ray over there, primarily spinal implants like screws and rods and plates and also other things. And my primary responsibilities were in document control, labeling, and internal audits. So during my time there, my family, we became members of our local food co-op, and I became more and more just intrigued and interested and fascinated pretty much by local food systems. And the turning point was when I attended an ag conference that was nearby, about an hour south of here, and listened to a presentation from the Market Food Co-op on the state of the UP food system. So at that conference, I stepped forward and I volunteered to help in whatever way I could. And through a series of emails with Natasha Lance from Market Food Co-op, I was brought to the table of a new online marketplace-style food hub called the UP Food Exchange to help find a way over the hurdle of food safety certification for very small growers. And from there, through other conversations at the same time and also shortly afterwards, word got to Steve Warshauer, that the UP had a quality systems guy on their team. And at that point, we were asked to join the GroupGAP pilot in late 2013. And so like Jeff mentioned, I wanted to share this to kind of get the gears turning in your minds as to who might be in your communities, whether there's like a manufacturing facility somewhere nearby or something along those lines that has both a background in quality systems and an interest in local food, because the quality management system is that central component to a GroupGAP program. I was just interested and community member that wanted to be involved, and it's a potential good route for engagement. So a little bit about the UP, Upper Peninsula, and the UP Food Exchange pilot. So the UP is that blue shaded area. No, we're not part of Canada, and yes, we do get left off US maps pretty regularly. It's large and pretty rural. It's about 320 miles from end to end, east to west. It's 1/3 the landmass of Michigan, but only contains less than 5% of the population. It's pretty rural and pretty sparsely populated. So our group consisted of small, diversified growers, growing everything from leafy greens to herb crops and everything in between, and very, very small. Some basically just a hoop house with a few garden beds. They're mostly market gardens. We had 10 growers that went through the full program, and they were spread out throughout pretty much the whole UP. Most of them were in the central area, but there were some on the east end and some on the west end, so we had covered the whole breadth of it. And some of the reasons why we thought the UP would be a good fit for this pilot were, one, we were just starting to bump into the certification requirements from some buyers, but more importantly, because of our location, our short growing season, the size of our growers, all of those things, we thought it would provide a really good case to see just how far this program could scale and how far could we stretch it and still see if it works. So we went through the process that Donna just outlined. We passed all of our audits, and our group was certified in the fall of 2014. Some of the successes, one of the major helps for our success was the foundation that was laid from a couple years worth of food safety trainings, 2 or 3 years prior to this undertaking. Those trainings were provided by the Market Food Co-op to UP growers. And so as a result of that, the farmers that were involved already had a pretty good base of knowledge regarding food safety, which made implementation a lot smoother. We also did an initial site visit, or basically a mock audit prior to our internal audits. That was pretty much just a dress rehearsal for both the farmer and the auditor. We used those to help everyone get used to the auditing process, both the farmer and the auditor, and also identify any areas that needed improvement. And those were very helpful for everyone involved. Some of us were able to shadow and observe our state auditor, which was also really beneficial, just to be able to sit at the elbow of a more experienced auditor and see how they do things, what they look for, how they evaluate different things, and so on, and see how it lines up with your own perspectives. And also the very common question of what happens if a farm fails an audit. Well, we had that happen. One of our farmers was using old compost that was compost, but she didn't have the records to back it up. And she was using that compost at time of transplanting, so which earned her an automatic unsatisfactory. So with that, we were able to put our quality management system corrective action procedures into action and resolve the issue fairly easily. And so we got through that without too much trouble. It was a good case test for that. And then ultimately, the UP Food Exchange chose not to continue to administrate a group after the first year, primarily due to cost, both in travel and staff time. The UP is very big, And the UP Food Exchange is an online marketplace. It's not an entity in and of itself. So the Marquette Food Co-op provided the majority of the staff time, and it was just unable to sustain that into another year moving forward. For further information on the UP pilot, if you go to the ngfn.org website /food safety, which I think Jeff will mention this later in the presentation too, the MSU Extension has a white paper on that pilot that goes into much further detail, breaks down the costs pretty granularly, and there's some more information with that. So through all this process, I was still working at RTI and helping out with UP Food Exchange as a community volunteer as I could. I was the QMS lead in the project, but then late in 2014 I was hired into full-time food systems work by Cherry Capital Foods, a food hub in Traverse City, Michigan, to create and facilitate a GroupGAP group for them. Yay! I went from a company that dealt in stacks of vertebrae to one that dealt in stacks of vegetables. On to year 2. So in 2015, for the Cherry Capital Foods group, we started with 7 farms. You can see the locations marked by stars on that map, although the one at the very top up in the UP is me in Marquette. That's not one of the farms. The growers this time around, they're also small and diversified, but they were a little bit bigger. All of them were still, except for one, were 25 acres or less, but all of them were full-time farmers too. And we also had a 5,000 square foot hydroponic greenhouse that was in there too. But yeah, again, very spread out, most of them in the western half of lower Michigan. And then, this time around, one of the things I did differently in this pilot from the first pilot was that I used a wiki to create and contain all of our QMS procedures and kept everything electronic. Which a wiki is basically just a web page that all of my administration team had access to and could edit and update and change. And this kept everything accessible in real time from anywhere. And I wanted to highlight this because, one, I think it's pretty cool, and two, it shows that there are several avenues and things to think about when you're building a quality management system. You know, the first time through we had basically a folder full of Word documents and Excel spreadsheets, and then also some hard copies. Other groups have binders. You know, there's no wrong or right way to do it, but there's a lot of different approaches that you can use to fit whatever situation you're in. So this time around was also successful. We went through all of our audits. 6 of the 7 growers completed the program. One chose to drop out pretty early on just because he had bitten off more than he could chew, and realized it pretty early, and so he just dropped out. So here's a quick summary of the costs. I'm not going to read every one of them off to you, as you can see them there, but you know, it's not exactly cheap. There's a lot of time and travel involved, although that can really vary, you know, widely based on your situation. Michigan's pretty expansive. I did a lot of driving last year, but luckily Michigan is gorgeous. One thing too I wanted to highlight is the different auditors. You know, I was one of the auditors, but we also had, these are all Cherry Capital Foods staff people. We also had the produce buyer who did some audits, the institutional partnership manager, and the finance manager who was also a farmer. So we had a really nice spread of expertise and experience on our audit team, which really helped as we also rotated our audits through. So we had different perspectives on each farm. So some takeaways from the second year. Michigan is big, and there's these big bodies of water that you have to go around. So yeah, there's a lot of driving, so we're looking to try to solve some of that for this next year. Building on the successes of the UP pilot was a major benefit for this group. It was still a learning experience for everyone. We had new farmers, we had new auditors. The first year through, I was a volunteer, and I mostly managed the quality management system. This time through, I was facilitating it myself, which was very new to me, and the program itself was developing. It's the nature of a pilot. One of the greatest assets we had going for us, though, is that in Michigan, we have a great working relationship with our state colleagues, both the state auditors and the Michigan Department of Ag folks, and they're very willing from day one just to be a part of things, to learn alongside us, which is another success of the UP pilot, bringing them into the circle early on. there's also a wonderful collaborative network of food hubs and other ag partners in Michigan. And having those relationships already established going into this project was invaluable for both the UP and the Trade Capital Foods pilots. So looking ahead to 2016, we're developing partnerships with other food hubs around Michigan, and we're exploring the potential for a statewide group that would have the QMS and admin functions centrally located at Trade Capital Foods, and with smaller subgroups in different areas and regional internal auditors, a kind of network of networks approach. What we found was that there are, and how we could roll this out in the state, there were a lot of smaller groups of maybe a half dozen, maybe 10 farmers working with maybe a small food hub or some other kind of organization that didn't really have the capacity to take on the full administration duties of a GroupGAP group, but were nonetheless interested. So we thought, well, hey, if we could provide the administrative capacity, and if these smaller groups could provide some of the internal auditor capacity, that would cut down on some travel, and we could all do this collectively as a statewide approach. So stay tuned for more information on that. I'm sure that if it works well, we'll probably do another Wallace webinar on it. And then to end, I just wanted to share the biggest success story for me from this last year. About halfway through the season, I got a phone call from one of our growers saying that they were planning on dropping out, and they just had too much on their plate. And I said, you know what, let's try this. Since I'm already planning on coming down there, I was already have your internal audit scheduled, let's just keep that on the books. I'll come and do your internal audit. We'll see where you're at. And then if you still want to drop out afterwards, that's totally fine. You're not bound by anything, no hard feelings, whatever. So I went down, and they totally passed their internal audit with flying colors. I mean, they were awesome. I was totally blown away by how good they did. And what happened was they were just in a bit of a stressful time and didn't think they could do it. But they ended up staying on, stayed with the program, and now they're certified. And I think that's definitely one of the top strengths of GroupGAP, is that it provides that collaborative structure that helps growers, get over that food safety certification hurdle, not by lessening the requirements or making it easier per se in that end, but by giving them that communal group encouragement that says, hey, you can do this. That was a huge success for me this year. So, as you say in the UP, thanks, and look forward to some questions later. And Jeff, the ship is yours.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you for sharing that story. I really love that story. It is just such a difference when growers are supported by a network of peer growers and an expert to just sort of keep on keeping on. I just love that story. Okay, I would like to now introduce Allison Wallen, who is Certification Programs Manager Emeritus at Organic Valley. She got involved with the food safety program development there after she was recognized for her ability to build programs and develop people. At Organic Valley, she collaborated with her colleagues to build the quality management system, which governs the on-farm food safety program. In Allison's free time, you may find her experimenting in her own garden or exploring the beautiful rolling hills of the Kickapoo Valley in southwest Wisconsin. Organic Valley came to the GroupGAP pilot with the most existing capacity to implement the program. So this is really a great example of the realization of GroupGAP with a really deep and talented team to cooperate for success. So, Allison, tell the story.
Jeff, I would love to, but I got booted out.
Okay.
I don't have any, so I have to log out and log back in.
Got it.
Want to skip ahead to Pennsylvania?
Well, or if you have the slides in front of you, I can just advance the slides myself, and you can.
That's fine.
All right.
That's great.
Yeah, let's go with it. All right.
Okay, great.
Let's take you to your first slide.
So thanks so much, Jeff. So as Jeff said, my name is Allison. I work at Organic Valley, and we're going to review today a little bit of a very brief overview of our Organic Valley Cooperative, what our produce grower demographic looks like, why we chose GroupGAP, a little bit about the implementation of our program, how we paid for it, and some of our successes and challenges along the way. So we can go to the next slide. So Organic Valley is a farmer-owned cooperative representing approximately 1,800 farmers from Maine to California. We were founded in 1988 by a group of 7 farmers in southwest Wisconsin, and our roots are in produce. though produce only comprises about 1% of our business today. Today we produce dairy, eggs, meat, soy, and produce. And currently we're over $1 billion in sales. All right, we can go to the next slide. So a little bit about our Organic Valley produce farmers. You can see the map of the United States. Most of our farmers are located in southwest Wisconsin, within about 25 miles of our Lafarge, Wisconsin headquarters. But we do work with producers in Pennsylvania, Maine, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, Oregon, and Canada. The producers, though, that are participating in our GroupGAP program are located in the Midwest and Pennsylvania. We currently have approximately 100 farmers participating in our group. So, like Jeff said, by far that's the largest group in the pilot program. The growers with whom we are working in the other areas of the country are required to submit a third-party verified food safety audit prior to shipping. A little bit about our our producers. That'll be the next slide, Jeff. So 80% of our producers in our produce pool are Amish or Mennonite, and we really appreciate the great neighbors that they are, and enjoy seeing their buggies at our headquarters and our consolidation point that we built to consolidate their produce. Their farms on average are 2 to 10 acres, and they will grow a mix of as many as 12 to 15 different crops per 2 to 10 acres. And then on the next slide you can see just briefly our product mix. So the products that we grow and represent as Organic Valley. All right, the next slide. So in response to the question of, what indicators made us decide that we were ready to pursue GroupGAP, and as we thought about that and I came into the program, we had a few customers starting to request food safety certification. Our facilities had implemented the British Retail Consortium audit scheme in order to satisfy the GFSI requirements. And we were interested in mitigating risk to our brand and business. And additionally, we knew that the Food Safety Modernization Act was coming, and we wanted to try to be ahead of the curve for that. And then thinking about the demographic of our farmers and what exactly made GroupGAP a good fit for our group, that as an exclusively organic farmer-owned cooperative, it is part of our mission to keep family farms farming. When our business dictates that we need to add an additional certification, it's our responsibility to support our farmers to the best of our ability. Therefore, implementing GroupGAP afforded us the opportunities to expand our food safety farmer trainings, to provide a template of on-farm food safety policies, procedures, and records, to reduce the burden of implementation of our farmers, and to financially support the additional costs of an added or required certification. GroupGAP also allowed us to have greater insight into our production and thus have more control over mitigating any risk that accompany producing and selling raw produce. So what experiences did our producers previously have with food safety and other third-party audits? So again, as an exclusively organic farmer-owned cooperative, our farmers were familiar with the rigors of organic certification. Prior to implementing GroupGAP and due to customer requirements, we did have a handful of producers that had participated in the GAP-GIP audits. While our farmers are familiar with the additional record keeping required for organic certification, we still found that the additional paperwork for food safety program was the most objectionable part of implementing that on their farms. By and large, our farmers were practicing principles of food safety, but they just weren't writing it down. So thinking about all that, and then how did our farmers receive the programs? Generally speaking, the program was received favorably. Like with many things, I found that when we were diligent about explaining the why, then our participants gained understanding and were supportive of the program. The most common deficiencies during the audit process were due to poor record keeping. Implementing the program went relatively smoothly, considering we were participating in a pilot program, but I believe one of the key components to the success of our implementation was relying on the community structure of our Amish farmers. We started with the bishops and the community leaders who we felt would lead by example. We held training sessions and mock audits on those farms. We also invited small groups to shadow an actual internal audit during which we allowed the growers to ask questions. It was great for the growers to see farms that looked a lot like their own in terms of their learning curve. We also changed the way that we offered training, food safety training, from a 6-hour classroom setting to a 2-hour classroom setting of general principles of food safety, followed by a workshop with stations that address some of the major components of the on-farm food safety plan, like the water risk assessment, water plan description, hand washing, and land use risk assessment. We also established a wonderful partnership with our state-level partners at the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture. These gentlemen attended our trainings, helped to train our internal auditors, and were a tremendous resource as we continued to learn and implement our program. I feel that one thing that sets our program apart from our friends and colleagues that were also part of the pilot program is being that we were the largest organization, though our farmers were quite close in proximity to one another. So we didn't have quite as far distance to travel and could really rely on each other to build that program. We also have 3 legs to our program, being that we have an organizational structure that could support with resources and manpower the development of the program. So in order to add a certain level of robustness, we divided our program into these 3 components: an educational leg, which really focused on the on-farm education and implementation of the on-farm food safety plan. This consumed 3 full-time employees doing farm visits and helping with implementation. The second leg was the on-farm compliance, which had 4 full-time employees housed in, and they were responsible for housing the quality management system, responsible for all of the internal audits, the follow-up audits, unannounced surveillance reviews, and the correspondence. And then our third leg was our system compliance. These two folks worked in our quality assurance department and were responsible for doing the internal audit of our system and providing guidance to make sure that our quality management system was in compliance to the USDA standards and ISO 22006. In addition, we have cross-departmental committee who meets regularly to discuss areas of risk, specifically water, and continuous improvement, significant process changes, and reviews overall audit results for process improvement. So how exactly did we fund the implementation? Even though we have more resources than some of the other groups, we did receive a grant to help with the initial implementation of our program. Additionally, in the first year of our program, our state auditors had received a grant that covered half of the total cost of their audits for our system audit. Now that we have incorporated the cost of GroupGAP, we have incorporated our cost of GroupGAP into our operating budget. Largely, the cost of the program is staff time, and we do pay for all of our farmers' audits. This program doesn't cost anything to our farmers. We do have some producers who sell to multiple markets, and they have chosen to pursue alternative food safety programs. Even though they're pursuing additional food safety programs, they are required to submit a third-party verified audit prior to shipping product to Organic Valley. The most significant cost to the program for us was water testing, as we recognize that water testing is our primary risk, and we have pursued aggressively additional water testing to help comply with FSMA and also create a plan to mitigate that risk. So what were some of our group's primary challenges and successes of GroupGAP? Our challenges on farm were paperwork. Our farmers are resistant to paperwork, and having more paperwork was always a challenge. And secondly, water. So we felt that our single greatest risk to food safety is water. It is also our greatest challenge. Understanding the testing requirements, the regulations or lack of regulations surrounding private wells, standards, and whether we rely on the coliforming units or E. coli to create our standards. We did use a significant amount of our grant money on water testing, and we've had hours and hours of conversations and debates over water. We have made decisions and revoked those decisions, and no doubt about it, water is hard. Some of our successes include after about 2 seasons, we really see our farmers beginning to embrace food safety practices and understand the value to applying food safety to their operations. We hear regularly from them that they've become better farmers as a result of implementing food safety. We're considering the opportunity of applying the quality management system with appropriate tweaks to other scopes that require third-party audits within our organization. And of course, the new friends and resources that we've made in the industry at the Wallace Center and our friends at the USDA. In conclusion, while our implementation of GroupGAP was driven by our desire to mitigate risk and anticipate the needs of our customers, we have heard repeatedly from our farmers that they feel they are farming smarter, and after implementing the program, we have greater awareness and better food safety training for our farmers. We have provided a service to both our farmers and our consumers. I hope that you can find the benefit of GroupGAP to your group.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And sorry about the tech difficulties, but I love that, the lesson of farming better as a result of GroupGAP food safety. It's just the broad implications always fascinate me. So I'm going to now move on to the final pair of pilots presented together by Lindsay and Jeff. So let me introduce them. Lindsay Gilmore has over 35 years experience in the food industry and 11 years in value chain coordination. She was co-manager of the USDA GroupGAP pilot for Fair Food in Philadelphia, working with 2 co-ops, and continues to provide food safety support and education for individual farmers. Previously, she worked on farmer outreach and product development for the Food Hub Common Market Philadelphia. And Jeff Stolzfus has been working as an extension educator with farmers for the past 29 years, first with Penn State Cooperative Extension in soil nutrient management and water quality projects, and more recently with the Eastern Lancaster County School District as an adult agriculture educator, covering the area of vegetable and crop production and marketing. It's in this role that he worked with Fair Food and the Wallace Center to build the GroupGAP food safety system. Jeff is transitioning into a new position with Penn State Cooperative Extension as a food safety educator based in Lancaster County. He lives on the small farm he grew up on, raising pumpkins, and beef cattle with his wife and 2 daughters. As you listen to Lindsay and Jeff, note the similarities and differences in structure of the 2 groups they work with and how that changed the 2 co-ops' experiences with GroupGAP. And I just up front here, I also want to point out that this is an example of how groups can use external contractors to design and manage the group process. So, Lindsay, Jeff, take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We'll try not to get confused with the Jeff. Do I have the controls? Yeah, not sure that I have yet. Thank you so much for that introduction. And Jeff and I are going to bounce the ball back and forth to one another on this presentation once I get control. Is something happening? Alex? Okay. Jeff, Fabian, do you want to see to the next one?
Yeah, we can just do the slide. Alex, you can do that.
Okay. All right, so as Jeff Barbman said, we were actually contracted by Fair Foods Philadelphia, which is a value chain coordinator. And Fair Food does many different things, and many of you may be familiar with it, but one of the things that Fair Food has done over the years is provide technical assistance to farmers. And since food safety is the most recent significant barrier, it seemed like a really good idea to take this on and build capacity to provide services to farmers around food safety. So Fair Food was asked to pilot this USDA GroupGAP in Pennsylvania, and Jeff Stoltzfus was an obvious person to take that on, since he has, beyond working with one of the larger co-ops that we worked with, working on food safety for them for years, he's also been involved with multi-state efforts on food safety. So I think we can, and I just wanted to put in here the self-proclaimed accidental experts on GroupGAP. Somebody called me that the other day, and I just want to use every opportunity to use that title. Thank you very much. All right. Jeff, you're on for this one.
Okay. As I mentioned, my name is Jeff Stoltzfus, and I've worked with growers here for many years. And we started growing onions for a branded onion here in Pennsylvania. We call it the Pennsylvania Simply Sweet. About 15 years ago, and that group has grown, and they've organized as a cooperative about 10 years ago. It's just a bunch of farmers who got together. They were growing onions. They were trying to find markets. And so now they are up to between 90 and 100 farmers, primarily Amish and Old Order Mennonite in and around Lancaster County, but that has now spread to the central part of Pennsylvania as well. They're managed by a board that's elected by the growers. It's a grower run. They do not, unlike some of the other groups, do not have a lot of capacity beyond the group. So it's run by farmers. They have a packing house where they do hire some help, but pretty much all the management, all the decisions are made by the growers. The co-op works with a broker who handles the marketing. They do have a packing facility, so the farms, it was a little easier to work food safety on the farms because the growers were only had field production. They were not doing any on-farm packing, so we had a separate food safety plan for the packing house, and that was kept separate from the GroupGAP. And the other group.
Next slide. So I'm going to talk about this group. Sunny Harvest is a much smaller cooperative. They call themselves a cooperative. Technically, it's a membership LLC, but they certainly operate as a cooperative. So last year, 2014, 2015, they had 15 to 16 members that were participating in GroupGAP. They, unlike the onion growers, they're small diversified farms, and they're doing some washing, and certainly all the packing on their farms. And they aggregate to sell to wholesale buyers in southeastern PA and New Jersey. Again, similarly to the onion co-op, as we call them, Sunny Harvest is managed by a board of 4 members that are elected by the members, and 3 of them are the gentleman that actually founded the group. They use a third-party trucker to actually do deliveries to their customers, but they do everything else themselves. And they have aggregation points on 3 of the farms with some refrigeration and also a hydro cooler on one of those farms. Next slide. So why these groups? First of all, they were known to both of us. Obviously, Jeff had a very close relationship with Lancaster vegetable farmers, and he had helped Sunny Harvest a little bit with their food safety plan, and I had worked with Sunny Harvest when I was working at Common Market. So we knew these folks. We knew that they had to have had to be food safety audited for several of their customers to be able to sell to those customers. So we knew they were motivated, and that they had already been audited and certified by a group called EquiCert. Also the fact that they were different in size and style of business, we thought it would provide a really good contrast. what else did I want to say about that? Why these groups? Oh, the other thing about them being certified already meant that yes, they were motivated, but it required us to really do a two-year process with GroupGAP because they couldn't afford not to fail an audit. So in the first year they were the GroupGAP pilot, they were certified still by EquiCert, and in the second year it was the USDA that audited. They like the idea of having more insight into how all of the management, I should say, like the idea of having more insight into how all the other farms were doing with food safety. And they were hoping that this was a way that the group could save time and money to be certified, and they were certainly attracted to the subsidized education and support that we provided. Next.
Okay, so some of the things they had in common, the structure, the mission of each group is to aggregate and sell produce for their members. These are just a group of farmers who are trying to work together to tap into some larger markets. They're self-organized. They're run by a board of members who are also growers. They started out very small. It starts out with a few guys working together, and then it kind of expands as their capacity increases as they get bigger markets. So they had no paid administrative staff, so the capacity to do some of these kind of things, like have internal auditors, develop QMSs, was kind of limited. They just didn't have the time or the expertise to do that. Next slide. So a little of the history. As Lindsay mentioned, both groups had previously been audited by a private company that they used, EquiCert. A few farmers have been doing it for a couple of years. So most of the farmers had some basic food safety training. They had a food safety plan. They had been using the harmonized food safety standards in the past. But of course, they were bringing on new growers each year, so we had new farmers each year to bring up to speed. And so we had to work very hard at education to keep everybody together on the same page. So there's differences between the two groups. The Lancaster vegetable farmers, or the onion co-op as we call it, they actually grow 3 crops, market 3 primary crops. It's onions, processing butternut squash, and to a smaller extent cauliflower. So they have had as many as 100 growers. Sunny Harvest, the growers are growing a much wider range of products, and there's only about 16 of those. One of the other differences is the onion growers are mostly a cash. The onions are kind of a cash crop for them. Many of them are dairy farmers. Many of them have other enterprises on the farm. Some of them have off-farm jobs. The Sunny Harvest growers tended to be more full-time vegetable growers and had multiple crops, including things as leafy greens and tomatoes, which tend to be more high risk. They tended to do more washing and hydrocooling. The onion growers primarily had low risk crops like onions and squash. So there was some drying, but not really any cold storage. The other difference, of course, was the packing. Our onion growers did not pack at all on the farm, as I mentioned. The other folks did. So there was a lot more training and record keeping that goes on when you do on-farm packing. So yeah, next slide.
So I'm going to talk about the implementation. I should say that I took on the role of being trained in and developing the quality management systems, and I was completely new to that. I'd never had anything to do with quality management systems except food safety plans, which are of course a type of quality management system, but certainly not the ISO style QMS that we had to develop. So I will say that the community of practice through Wallace was absolutely invaluable, and also Phil Britton was wonderful help. Thank you, Phil. With Phil, actually, in the second year, early on in the second year, did a little mock audit of my QMS, which was really helpful, and then shared the QMS that he developed for the Upper Peninsula. So that gave me something of a template to work from, which I didn't have in the beginning. and it was pretty overwhelming. But the advantage that all of you will have is the experiences we have and the resources that we can share with you. So you won't be starting from such a wide open and confusing landscape as some of us did. So Jeff and I took on developing the food safety plans, developing the quality management system, coaching the farmers, and doing all of the internal audits and the farm audits and the QMS audits. So we were playing every role in this process, which was very challenging, but we certainly learned a whole lot. And I will say that each group had a food safety coordinator. One of the board members became the food safety coordinator for the group. So we worked with them very closely, and they got really tired of talking to us, really. But they were the ones who really got to know the quality management system and the record keeping associated with that. So in the first year, well, the very first thing we did, of course, was to meet each group and get them on board. And they were pretty, it didn't take much to convince them, I will say. We immediately got into meetings with the community of practice around the country and got trainings on the whole idea of GroupGAP. I did a lot more training specifically on quality management systems, and I also attended an internal auditor training in the first year, which really helped me to understand what the QMS was all about. Jeff had already written the food safety plan for Lancaster vegetable farmers, but we revised that, and I wrote the first really real plan that Sunny Harvest had. The plan they had, particularly because they don't use, these are Amish farmers. There's actually the food safety coordinator at Lancaster vegetable farmers, for some strange reason, is really tech savvy and uses computers and gets around on the web like crazy, better than we are. We don't really understand how that is, but it is what it is, and it was really helpful. Sunny Harvest did not use any technology, really, so the food safety plan that they started with was pretty rudimentary. So I basically had to start from scratch for them. So we developed those things, created more in the way of records, logs for them to keep. We had many, many meetings with board members about the QMS. We did group food safety trainings with both groups. And then we did one-on-one coaching with almost every farmer in each group. I think we got to around 80% of the farmers in the larger co-op and certainly all of the farmers in the smaller co-op. And that was really sitting around the kitchen table with them, doing walk-arounds of the farm and risk assessments of their farms with them. And we used that as an opportunity to guide them through the self-audits that they needed to do. And we did actually issue corrective action reports in that first year that they had to complete and get the completed records back to the food safety coordinator. And then we monitored the EquiCert external audits, and that kept us pretty busy. And then in the second year, we continued with the training, focusing a lot on the harmonized standard for ourselves. We got further into understanding how the harmonized standards, what they mean, and different examples of how to audit to that standard. We did more revision and we streamlined the food safety plans in the QMS, and I really cut out a lot of excess in that second year, which the farmers greatly appreciated. And we also revised and streamlined the logs. We tried to combine as many functions as possible onto each log to reduce the amount of paperwork that they had to keep track of. We continued with the training of the board members. Each time the QMS was revised, of course, there had to be more meetings with the food safety coordinator and other board members. And we also really fully implemented the QMS in the second year. We continued with the group food safety trainings, but we were not able to do individual coaching in the second year. What the time that we had for that was taken up with internal audits. Jeff's going to talk a bit more about the clustering system, but that was also really important for us to be able to achieve something with the larger co-ops. So our successes. So both co-ops are now GroupGAP certified. We got through that successfully in the second year. As with the Upper Peninsula folks, we had one farm that failed an external audit in the Sunny Harvest external audits. It's simply for not filling out a log that was one of the risk assessments that was a requirement. And we were able to navigate that through internal auditing processes and through the system, the quality management system. Having that in place enabled us to reinstate him as a full member and able to sell through the co-op in the following year. We did have one farmer in the onion co-op that had to be removed. He just wasn't interested in food safety. As with the other groups, trainings, coaching, and internal audits led to a much greater familiarity with food safety and much more authentic implementation, I would say, of their food safety best practices. As I talked about earlier, we were able to streamline the paperwork a great deal, and that is something the farmers commented on. The successful USDA GroupGAP audits for Lancaster vegetable farmers meant they could continue to sell to Walmart and to Giant, I believe. Those were the two that required a USDA audit. And we were able to audit the Lancaster vegetable farms in clusters. I'm going to let Jeff talk about that more. And we were able, and as new farmers came on, we were able to give them the kind of training they needed to be able to be a full member much more quickly in terms of their food safety implementation. And then the most important thing, and the thing that the farmers valued the greatest, was all of the coaching we were able to give them. Next slide.
Okay, yeah, some of the challenges, maybe I'll go into the clustering. One of the things we tried to do with the larger groups, one of the challenges that you have with 100 growers, we only grow about 125 acres of onions on actually about 80 onion farms. That means we have to have 80 audits as opposed to a 125-acre farmer who only has one audit. So we thought maybe we could group some farms together and make those 3 or 4 or 5 farms look like one farm. We didn't exactly get there. We're still working on that, but one of the things that we did is we put these groups that were close by. Many of these farms lived within, maybe a mile or two of each other. So we put them in kind of geographic clusters so that when the auditor came out, they were visiting 5 farmers around the table rather than just visiting one farm and then getting up and going to another farm and sitting down and doing that audit again. We were able to save a significant amount of time for those farms. They were still audited as separate farms by our state auditors, but at least we did speed up that process by being able to do that. We're still working on trying to make some farms kind of become food safety partnerships so that both farms are covered under one audit. That's one of our goals, I think, for the coming year, to see if we can do that. But some of the challenges that we had were developing and understanding, maintaining the quality management system. It's not easy to do the first year or two. The more you do it, obviously the easier it becomes, the less time consuming it is. But it does take some management to keep track of all of the documents that need to be managed. It took a lot of time to do what the coaching that we felt needed to be done in internal auditing. The small group really can't manage a QMS without external support, meaning either Lindsay or myself, especially since they don't use computers, so that's going to be an added cost for them going forward. And the capacity just to coach, and that's a cost as well. Who pays for the coach and the internal audits? So that's part of the challenge. And yeah, we believe the internal auditing would like to see that become more of a coaching opportunity rather than an internal auditing. So yeah.
So just quickly, you can see from this slide the differences in costs for each group were significant. And for Lancaster vegetable farmers, it actually makes sense to continue with GroupGAP. For Sunny Harvest, it really doesn't make sense. And I based these on a cost of $50 per hour for internal auditing and coaching. So it would vary depending on how much you actually had to pay for those services. And if you could have them in-house, maybe you would pay less. You could pay a lot more. So yeah, final outcomes, LVF is going to continue. And Sunny Harvest is not. Clearly, their internal audit, their GroupGAP audit the group GAP process would cost more than for each farm to get an individual audit, and if they did that, they wouldn't have to worry about the QMS, the extra level of work that the QMS entails, and they are going back to having Equicert do the audits. And Equicert will be doing the internal audits for Lancaster vegetable farmers this year. Next, final slide. So we were funded by a local CDFI the first year. I can't remember what CDFI means. Community Development Fund. So Fair Food, when Fair Food was asked if they were interested in running this pilot, they were already had been asked to apply for this money from the reinvestment fund, so it was a great fit. And then the second year, the Wallace Centre provided the money specifically for Group GAP and also subsidized Sunny Harvest through their external audits. And so we want to recommend strongly when you go after funding that you get as much as you can for training, coaching, and internal auditors. If you have to have external internal auditors, it's really critical that there's enough money in your budget for training. We certainly weren't paid $50 an hour, I will say that. But anybody who goes through all of this training to be able to provide this service would probably want to be paid at least that.
So with Lindsay and Jeff's presentation, you saw, and several others, you saw that GroupGAP is not cheap. So and Lindsay was just talking about funding. We asked Garland Robinson to come on and tell us about a few grant opportunities from USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. This is definitely not the sum total of grant funding opportunities available, but this is a good sample of what the government offers. I'm going to introduce Garland as a grant management specialist with USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, and his direct responsibility is the specialty crop block grants. He's been at USDA for several years. He's a native of Louisiana and has a bachelor's degree in plant science and a master's in soil science from Alabama A&M University. Garland.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello. Thanks for this opportunity to share with you the grant programs that we have here at AMS Transportation and Marketing Division. So today I want to share with you 3 of our grant programs. Farmers Market Promotion Program, Local Foods Promotion Program, and Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. The eligible entities for the Farmers Market and Local Food Promotion Programs are some of your agricultural businesses, CSA networks and associations, nonprofit corporations, producer networks, tribal governments, regional farmer markets authorities, producer associations, public benefits, et cetera, et cetera. For the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, these programs are pretty much the only eligible, well, the 50 states are eligible to apply because these are block grants, and the states are the ones who set up the peer review panels or do the solicitation for the awards or for the grants. A little bit more about the Farmers Market and Local Promotional Program. The purpose is to increase domestic consumption of and access to locally and regionally produced agricultural products and to develop new market opportunities for farm and ranch operations serving local markets. So grant awards support local and regional food systems with up to $100,000 for over 1 to 2 years. The difference between these 2 programs, FMPP, or Farmers Market Promotional Program, is a direct-to-consumer program, and the Local Food Promotional Program is intermediary and it's distributor-based. It also requires a 25% match. Along with that, it has it's a planning grant. The maximum has a planning grant and an implementation grant for LFPP. The maximum for the planning grant is $25,000, and the implementation again is $100,000. So I want to give you some examples of the farmers market promotional program. As you can see, $100,000 was awarded to Delaware State University to provide national certification training in food safety and handling. Another example of a local food promotional program, the city of Elgin, Texas, was awarded a little under $100,000 to provide processing, tech support to farmers, entrepreneurs, and wholesale and institutional buyers. Another LFPP, we had $99,000 was awarded to Human Links to address gaps in food safety, food storage safety, as well as obtain GAP and GHP certifications. So a little bit about the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. This program basically enhances the competitiveness of specialty crops, which are your fruit, vegetables, tree nuts, cut flowers, and other horticultural products. Again, it's awarded to state departments of agriculture, who then partner with specialty crop stakeholders. These projects can focus on a wide variety of specialty crop initiatives, including food safety, and the award amounts vary by state. So an example that I have for the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, $55,000 was awarded to North Carolina Department of Agriculture to perform on-farm workshops and one-on-one consulting on tips and strategies to reduce risk, and pass an audit to specialty crop growers, develop training videos for the GAP manual, and also provided cost share assistance to specialty crop growers who participated. So if you'd like further information about our grant programs, you can go to our website. That's here. And contact information for our Grants Division Director, Deputy Director, and then my contact is below. So, you know, if you have, I'll be glad to answer your questions when we have the question session that opens up later.
Great. Thank you so much. So this is Jeff again. I had a little bit to talk about with the resources that Wallace Center has, but really I think what I want to tell you is go to our website. If you go to ngfn.org/food safety, we have several GroupGAP resources available to you. Browse around, and if you want to talk to us about GroupGAP, email groupgap@ngfn.org. Browse around. There's good stuff, and we will be updating that on a regular basis. So, Steve, can I ask you if your audio is working for now, if you can give us just some final thoughts about GroupGAP and its value?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to make this 60 seconds to 90 because we need to leave a little time for questions. For me, I'm going to correlate personal experience to the importance of GroupGAP, which is that, you know, I realized very quickly as a small farmer that I could not get access to the kind of technical skill and resources that I needed to build a food safety culture on my farm. And what we're looking for, what FDA is looking for, what our customers are looking for, through all of these pieces, documentations, and trainings, is that we develop a culture of food safety, meaning that we think about our customers, we think about how to make the food safe, we understand the risks on our farm, and we take actions to mitigate them. And what it turns out is that, thought about in a broader sense, food safety is part of a culture of quality, and that culture of quality includes wholesale packing, all of the many things that make our product ready for market. So given the fact that we are gaining access to all these needed technical resources as part of our quality management system and our food safety system, that means that up front anyway, it is not cheaper. It is not a quick fix, but it is a systematic approach to bringing to our farms the necessary resources and the necessary skill sets to build a culture of food safety down to the smallest farms and across all of our farms. You heard some very interesting, from our three groups, you heard interesting descriptions of the peer effect, the farms becoming better farms, operating better as businesses, the brand protection aspect, and the aspect in which buyer expectations were met. The bottom line with quality management systems is that by implementing these practices, we meet requirements that our buyers and eventually the regulators have, and we also operate our businesses better. And as food hubs or food producer co-ops, we need to develop these skill sets, so we may as well extend them to our farmers, take responsibility for and credit for the work through the GroupGAP certificate. That's going to be my wrap-up. Let's see if we can get some questions.
Yeah, let's try to get some questions. And there have been some questions answered. If you look in your questions box, some of our panelists have been answering written questions. Annie asked, would this model work for farms not selling to the same buyer? In other words, selling a GroupGAP certified product outside of the group that they were certified with. I know that the folks.
Jeff, why don't you just take that one for questions that reach a broad cross-section of us instead of going to us as individuals? Let the moderator question.
Yeah. So theoretically, that could work. That is sort of up to the discretion of the owner of the quality management system. But generally, as you saw, setting the system up is rather expensive, and the central entity would rather maintain sort of ownership of that certification.
And Jeff, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
And there's two ways of looking at that. I'm not sure which direction the question was coming from. I guess the one question would be is, can you set up a GroupGAP if you have different markets? And ultimately, I guess the answer to that is yes. If you wanted to take 20 farmers all shipping to different buyers, but they wanted to do a GroupGAP program, as long as that GroupGAP program was obviously accepted by all those buyers, that would certainly be a use of GroupGAP. The other question is, can a grower who's involved in a GroupGAP audit sell to, say, a third party, or can he take that GroupGAP certification and now sell to somebody that the group is not marketing to? For example, the onion growers. And the challenge we had with the onion growers, allowing growers to do that, is our GroupGAP system only covered onion production or squash production. It did not cover tomato production or leafy greens production. So in those cases, we didn't want farmers taking our onion certification and taking that and now selling their leafy greens to someone else under the guise of our food safety program, because our food safety program did not look at the post-harvest handling of leafy greens. It did not look at the production of leafy greens. So in that case, then I guess the answer would be no. But if you had a system that was built around, with going into it, with everyone coming up with the idea of, hey, let's just work together on this for food safety, and we will cover, as part of our food safety plans, our entire operation, then I could see that working. Don't know if that added any clarity.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. Question for Donna. Is GroupGAP compliant with the Food Safety Modernization Act?
Oh, great question, Jeff. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, so this would apply to any of our audit services. We're working directly with FDA. As Steve mentioned earlier, we've got that contact and working relationship, and we're reviewing the audit acceptance criteria for all of our audit services against the new FSMA regulations. And any of our acceptance criteria that doesn't fall in line with FSMA will be changed in the next year to 3 years, depending on the applicable regulation. So GroupGAP uses those same audit services, so being in compliance via a GroupGAP certification will give you evidence that you're meeting the requirements of FSMA. So that's about as close as we can get to saying they meet FSMA requirements. Or, yeah.
All right, great, thank you. This could go to any of the pilots, but I'm going to single out Allison if you're willing. Do you have a sense for how buyers are responding to USDA GroupGAP? How are your buyers responding? Oh, there we may have. There you go. Got it.
Our buyers are curious to learn more details, but they are accepting GroupGAP once they learn about the program that we have implemented.
Great. Okay. Good. I think I'm going to, there are some other really great questions, but I want to be respectful of people's time. On the East Coast, it's almost quitting time. So I'm going to transition to my outro here. And I just want to say that the Wallace Center is really confident that GroupGAP will serve the local food and smaller farmer sector well, and we're so pleased that USDA has developed this important standard. We were and are privileged to work with such incredibly committed people inside and outside of the government. GroupGAP is definitely not for everyone, but it is another important piece of the food safety landscape. Thank you to the many panelists we had today, and again, huge thanks to the other GroupGAP pilots we worked with. We usually offer our NGFN webinars on the third Thursday of each month at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, but in March we're taking a break to host the National Food Hub Conference, truly the place to be if you are a food hub or if you support hubs. We only organize this conference every second year, so don't miss this one. There's lots and lots of information at ngfn.org/hubs2016. The URL is up there on your screen. We have over 50 workshops, trainings, plenaries, and breakout sessions. It's really an inspiring place to be. And from our previous conferences, survey data indicates that the average attendee makes 6 or more important networking connections out in the hallway. So open your web browser right now, go to ngfn.org/hubs and register. The last time we ran this conference, we were sold out weeks ahead of the conference, so don't miss your opportunity. You can find the NGFN on YouTube, Twitter, and our website. If you haven't already signed up for our email updates, there is a link on the ngfn.org homepage, or just let us know in the post-webinar survey. So, which will it sort of should open your web browser right after this. So we offer these webinars free, but it's really great to get feedback from you so we can continue to offer them free. And there are some great questions asking you about the status of your GroupGAP work, and if you have any skills that you'd like to let us know so that we can share your information with those who are looking for assistance in GroupGAP, food safety, quality management systems, etc. All right, thank you so much. Long webinar. This concludes the webinar, and we'll see you in Atlanta.